What do you think dyslexia is?
Hmm. I think maybe some type of disorder that affects a person's way of thinking and doing activities.
It's basically dyslexia is neurological in nature, and it is when a child has difficulties decoding words, spelling words. Sometimes they flip letters or words or um, reverse order, things like that when they're spelling. Or when they're sounding something out, they'll reverse the sounds within it, when they're sounding out a word. Um, they often have difficulties decoding nonsense words, especially with that, where they have to know that phonological awareness and phonics rules. They have to know those. That's difficult for them. Um,
Is dyslexia?
Maybe I think it's probably heredity or genetics, possibly. You're born with it.
Dyslexia is often hereditary. It does run in families. Not always, but sometimes it does. Um, so, as far as a cause, nobody really knows what causes dyslexia. It's a disturbance in the neurological system in some way. I think there's not a whole lot written about this, but I sense that there is a lot of kids who have that difficulty of what they see being able to then translate it into something verbally. I think that's a lot of it, and just what they are seeing, yeah, being able to, because you have to use what you see and what you interpret is using one part of the brain, but then being able to verbally say what it is that you see can be very difficult to that transition. So it's like there's a disconnect there. Kind of touched on that. They don't know the cause of it. Again, they know that there is a hereditary component to it. And many of the kids have attention difficulties, so they don't know if the attention difficulties maybe causes some of the dyslexia or this dyslexia causes attention difficulties. They don't know.
What do you think are some common signs of dyslexia?
Maybe faults in their reading and their schoolwork, decreased productivity.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, I could go through some of the common signs and symptoms of dyslexia. Many of them have ADD and ADHD. I would say over 50%, well over 50%, are somewhere, have some kind of severity level of the ADD, ADHD. They are slow to acquire vocabulary. So maybe they, as a younger child, their vocabulary was limited, or they might have speech articulation difficulties. Now it doesn't mean that those that have those delays will have dyslexia, but those with dyslexia more commonly have had issues when they were younger with articulation or language issues. Because reading is so language based. I mean, it's really very language based. They often have difficulties following directions, especially multi-step directions. They'll get things out of order, or they'll remember one but not the other, maybe the first direction but not the next one, or they don't remember the sequence of things. That's something that is very common. They have word finding difficulties. That is something that I think many of them experience throughout a lifetime. Even if they acquire that reading ability, there are a lot of kids and even into adults that I notice have that word finding difficulty. They'll start to say something and they can't get the right word. And we all do that to a certain extent, but there's, I would say, is a little higher percentage of those errors. They have difficulties with connections between the sounds and the letters. So what they see, interpreting what that sound should say and then being able to verbalize that, there's a disconnect there.
What challenges do you think these students face?
Probably their normal school activities like reading, writing, problem solving, things like that.
What challenges do these children face in school? Okay, well, typically from about kindergarten through the middle of second grade, there's not a ton. I mean, they will experience challenges and some frustrations, but typically at that age, they don't realize that they're delayed in that. So I would say at that point, they're learning to read, and so are all the other kids, and there's such a huge spectrum of kids' abilities from kindergarten through second grade that it really isn't a big issue. Where it becomes a big issue is probably halfway through second grade or into third grade. And when that is often when they're flagged for this, because by third grade, they are reading to learn, not learning to read. And so by third grade, they're expected to be able to read on their own and, maybe need a little bit of prompting and assistance, but for the most part, they're reading on their own. And so, of course, then their academics becomes more difficult, much more difficult. And so then they see all kinds of challenges. It's also at that time that they are socially just, if they're being pulled out of the classroom, that becomes a social issue. So, and I would say that's more the case for girls than boys. Boys typically don't care so much, but girls, it can really affect them emotionally. You see a lot more temper tantrums at home when they're trying to do homework because it's hard for them and they don't understand it, and they see parents as parents, not as teacher, and it becomes frustrating, and we see a lot of battles at home. And parents become frustrated because they want to help, but their child won't let them help, and it just becomes this vicious cycle. And it also, they start to feel a low self-esteem, like I can't do this, I'm not smart enough. And honestly, some of the kids that I see with dyslexia are some of the smartest kids I've ever met, because they have had to come up with all these compensation strategies over the years. They memorize things very, very well often because that's a compensation strategy. But it's really not a part of their intelligence, but they often feel like that.
What do you think teachers can do to help?
Work on them with their problems and
is identify these the reading delays, know what to look for, know those symptoms, to identify it as early as possible. Don't wait till they're in third grade and it's the frustration levels have been so high and they feel a low self-esteem, because then that's something else you have to work on. Teachers can also reteach the phonics rules. Some kids are just not ready for it at the time that they present it, and they need to have it again and again. What teachers can do, getting that diagnosis as quickly as possible. I know within the schools, rarely do they diagnose dyslexia. I don't know of any school that does. And the hard part is teachers are often not able to recommend that they go out and get a diagnosis. So, because then the school might be liable to have to pay for it. So it's kind of a catch-22.
How do you think dyslexia is diagnosed?
Through a doctor.
How is dyslexia diagnosed? Well, with our diagnosis, it's about 3 hours of testing. And we do the Woodcock reading assessment, which is, there's probably 7 or 8 subtests within that test that looks at like phonological awareness, how if they can segment words, like breaking words down into sounds or syllables. It looks at their spelling abilities. It looks at their reading rate, their reading fluency, their reading accuracy, and comprehension. And then it also looks at their comprehension, how for paragraphs that they read, and then comprehension for paragraphs that are read to them, which is a very important distinction too. We usually give a spelling test, another spelling test, and we give We also give what's called the SELF. It's Clinical Evaluation of Language Fundamentals. So that looks at receptive and expressive language because reading is so language based. We look at how their short-term language memory. We look at their ability to follow directions. We look at their ability to their vocabulary, both receptive, so their understanding of words, and expressive ability to like define it or use it in a sentence or something like that. We look at their ability to formulate sentences. That's all included in the language, and there's much more than that, but I can't remember all the subtests with that. And then compile all that information and then determine. We also give the parents a checklist of the signs and symptoms, and they check whether they see those signs or not. That's, especially if a child is borderline, that will help us to determine whether they do have diagnosis of dyslexia or it's just delayed reading.
Do you think that children can overcome dyslexia?
Yes, probably with the right training and techniques, maybe.
At one time, we actually took data. On average, when we first see a kid, we see about 2.5 years gain in about 5 to 6 months. So, and that's with accuracy. The rate comes a little later, but that's with the reading accuracy.